Hey there, welcome back. Today we are talking about mistakes in the depths, and let me tell you, there are a lot. Looking over the surface and depth connections, I would say that there are many blemishes, more than the 7 I've picked out for today. For the sake of avoiding repetition, I've decided to select 7 mistakes that are noticeably different from one another. It would be too easy to pick 7 instances where water didn't match up with what we see in the depths. Now kick back and relax, here are 7 depth mistakes in Tears of the Kingdom. Number 1. All of the ghosts are Hylians. No doubt you are aware of all the ghosts throughout the depths and how they hold pristine weapons. It is believed that these are ghosts from the Calamity, and that they are protecting their weapons after death, looking to pass them on to whoever. It's touching, with a notable trio of ghosts appearing under the monuments that Zelda has created. I really like the idea that these ghosts died during the Calamity, and they all appear to be Hylians wearing Hylian soldier armor. Sadly, if they are soldiers who died during the Calamity, this isn't confirmed in any way. For the sake of this video, I will be assuming that they are though. If this is the case, there is a really big flaw with the presentation. You see, there are more than Hylian weapons. They offer all the regional gear from the other races. Feather blades, cobble crushers, Zora spears, Gerudo scimitars, etc. They even offer the wooden weapons of the Children of the Forest and the curved blades of the Sheikah. The Calamity swept across the land. All of the territories were in danger from it, and so it makes sense that all of these areas would fight against it. The problem is that these ghosts only represent Hylians, and thus it seems odd that Hylian Ghosts would be the ones to offer non-Hylian weapons. Would it have taken that much more effort to create ghost models of the other races? Perhaps the Forest Dweller ones would be a bit odd since the Koroks don't really fight, but they could have come up with something, right? My point is that it is a mistake to have Hylians be the ones offering, say, Zora weapons. I also question the location of some of these items. It seems really odd that the Royal Guard gear is found in the Gerudo Highland, instead of, let's say, the ancient fortress found under the Akkala Citadel. Well, it seems like a big mistake to me at least. If you can justify it, go ahead and leave a comment. I'm curious what people might say about this. Number 2. Sky Light Roots. Throughout the game, you will encounter a few shrines in the overworld that have fallen from the sky. If we take into account the upheaval happening a few weeks earlier at most, or maybe even a few months, it raises the question why these shrines would have light roots associated with them. Assuming that the light root is organic and grew from the shrine, it seems like it would need more time than that in order to grow down into the depths. As such, these shrines stick out. Sure enough, when we look in the depths, they have light roots. And so, I have prepared a few demonstrations to explain why this doesn't work. First up is the Agaat shrine just north of Kakariko. The construct here explains that the shrine reveals itself once the puzzle is solved. I chose this one because the entire shrine is missing. Not even that round stand and the sand it would be sitting on, like we see with the other gem retrieval quest. So in addition to this landmass previously being floating in the sky, the shrine was completely missing until Link completed the task. Yet, when we go to the depths, we can see that there is a light root here. This clearly should not be the case, but I have more. Looking over the Morok shrine south of the wetlands, we can see that this one is still floating in the sky, but on the surface. You can even see how the tree roots have yet to dig into the surface soil. So, this island is indeed still in the air. And yet, like the last one, when we look at the depths, there is a sky root that corresponds with it. This simply does not make sense. You might try to justify it by saying that the light root exists independently of the shrine, or make some claim that the depths is changing to reflect the surface, but I have that covered too. Taking a look over at the, oh boy, this is a tough one, Siratobumak shrine, that's the one in Hyrule Castle. You can see how it was ripped into the sky due to the upheaval. This shrine has a corresponding light root because of course it was originally on the ground. But the thing of note here isn't so much that it has a light root, but that the light root continues to function despite the shrine being ripped into the air with no seeable connection. If there was a connection, it would have to travel down the high roll pillar, into the chasm, and then up the wall. To me, it seems like this light root should fail to activate, which honestly would have added even more dread to this location, perhaps having to fill in the last bit of map through some other means. As you can see, there are some mistakes here, and I would point out that there are more sky shrines that fell to the ground than I've outlined here. It would seem that the team in charge of making the depths may have been given a completed overworld map, inverted it, and started to build on it without paying attention to the nuances of the surface. There are other shrines that have fallen from the sky that have light roots, and so it begs the question, if some sky shrines have roots, shouldn't they all? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Before we continue to the next item though, are you enjoying the video? If you are, please consider subscribing to the channel. I probably don't need to tell you about the YouTube stuff, but a channel subscription count is the biggest metric that shows its growth. I put out a video every week, and I hope by the end of this one I will have earned your subscription. Now, back to the list. Number 3. Light in the Tingle Islands. On the far east side of Akkala are the Tingle Islands. By themselves, they're really not that special. In Breath of the Wild, there was a shrine hidden out there, and that made for a fun adventure while having to deal with some of the flying guardians. This time around, the islands are basically barren with only some minor monsters around and more importantly, a hidden chasm to the depths. Unlike in Breath of the Wild, there is no shrine here on these islands, and thus there is no light root under it either. This leads to an interesting situation where if you descend into the chasm, it should be completely dark, right? Here is some footage of me doing just that, and indeed it is completely dark as you would expect, with only a few things like pose and gloom providing any light. This changes if we activate the nearby light root, resulting in these 4 caverns to suddenly be illuminated. Thus, we have a mistake. Unless the light from the light root is able to pierce through solid walls in the depths, these caverns should remain in complete darkness. Given they are only connected to each other by a small corridor that you have to manually clear out, it seems as though no light should be able to travel through them. Also, I would like to express that I wish this game would allow more tunneling in it like in this location. Being able to mine into other chambers is genuinely a joy. Back to the point. The important thing I am trying to get to with this one is that these caverns should be completely dark, even with the neighboring light root nearby. It would be excusable if the light root was here in one of these islands, but even then, questionable how only a small tunnel would allow that light to pass into the next chamber. Still, that would have been far better than what we have here. These caverns being lit up defy logic, and that is why I mark it as a mistake. Number 4. The Medoh Perch Hole. Medoh's Perch is the name of the large rock that stands in the center of Rito Village. It's called that because Divine Beast Medoh was designed to rest upon it. You know, like a bird on a perch. Anyhow, I find it suspicious that it could rest all of its weight on this stone and not have it break. A giant mechanized unit armed to the beak with weapons doesn't seem like it would be very light, which makes me think that the interior of this stone was something a bit more stern. Under Rito Village is of course a mine. It takes a little bit of searching to find a chasm down to it, but in that location you will face off against Master Koga one final time, sending him blasting off yet again. Taking a look around this location reveals a few interesting things. Rubble that has fallen onto these stones looks like it might give way. You see, there are actually 2 mistakes here, and I think they might have realized it when they were making this location. The first mistake is that there should be a big hole here, a huge one that mirrors Medoh's Perch. I had heard that there was one out of bounds, and so I reached out to Sledgen in the community to help out. He was able to get me some footage of that very hole. I don't engage in glitches myself, but in this case, I needed the footage. As you can see, under the floor, there is indeed a huge hole, and it looks incomplete. I think it would have been really cool to see this hole about halfway full of, say, zoanite deposits. That way you could dig your way down while collecting it. It would have really fit in with the mining aspect of this location. They chose to cover it up though, which is interesting because it might hint at the idea that Medoh's perch wasn't supposed to be reflected in the depths. We can't take the hole for canon since it wasn't supposed to be viewed. I would say though that there should be a hole down here given that the depths reflects the surface. That is why I am calling this a mistake, even if the misaligned floor tiles might hint at a deeper hole beneath them. Number 5. Agaat Canyon Mine. Alright, this one is a bit more interesting, I think. You know how Hyrule has those hard boundaries around it that you can't cross, and when you try to, it pops up a message about being unable to go further? These come up when you try to cross a vast canyon, venture out into the sea, or run off into the desert. The important part is that around Hyrule, there are hard boundaries that the developers did not want you to go past. When we look at the depths, you can see that these boundaries are reinforced yet again, often in ways that don't make sense. For example, the Gerudo Desert should continue on to the coast well beyond the pyramid, and yet, in the depths, we see that there is a mysterious stone wall blocking the path. This was clearly a choice on their end. A mistake, I would say. I'm not here to talk about the Gerudo Desert Wall, as I call it. That was in my 7 Depths Mystery video. Instead, we need to look a little bit north to Mount Agaat. On the surface, Mount Agaat is one of those locations the game does not want you to get on. The hard, invisible border of the map prevents you from getting on it. Yet, when we look at this location in the depths, it is actually accessible. Not only accessible, but there is a mine down here too, along with a few weapon ghosts. If you look at the coordinates too, we can see that they are one of the deepest parts of the depths outside of Gloom's lair. And so it raises the question of why this area is accessible at all if it isn't on the surface. It seems to me that there should be a rock wall here preventing access to this location. That would be consistent with what we see elsewhere. More interesting is that there is a mine in this location, and based on what was stated by the construct under Rito Village, it implies that on the surface there could have been a spot suitable for a settlement. Ultimately though, this seems like a mistake to me, and a problem again with the developers creating a map without the context of the land they used. You see, if they took the finished map, inverted it, and then created the depths, this area to an unfamiliar eye may look like just another piece of land the player could walk on. You can see how the hard edge that they drew here lines up with the actual border of the visible map, and not the strange invisible wall on top of the mountain. As such, I find this one a little more forgivable, interesting even, but ultimately a mistake. Still, I'm happy to have some ghosts around here with some actual good loot, even if it doesn't make sense for the Royal Guard Hylian soldiers to be in the Gerudo Highland during the Calamity. Oh well. Number 6. The North Akkala Cliff Face. This one is kind of similar to the last one, but far less forgivable. One of the odd things I encountered on the surface was this outcropping in Akkala. It was there in Breath of the Wild too. It looks like you might be able to walk on this jagged cliff that keeps the sea from pouring into the ravine on the other side. This is one of the few places in the game where you can come into contact with the invisible wall of the map without any strange physics trying to push you away from it. Looking at the location in the depths, we see nothing. That outcropping simply doesn't have a depths counterpart to it, which is odd to say the least. You would expect a cave, maybe a mining facility, digging north into the wall. If not a mine, perhaps a tunnel, perhaps somehow connecting with Skull Lake nearby. Nope, it's just a solid wall with no indication of anything there, which is disappointing to say the least. This seems like an error to me, basically the same logic as the last mistake, where the developers inverted the map and made the depths from the land there. If I were to guess, I would say they didn't recognize the outcropping as a valid spot that you could stand in the overworld. and as such, erected a big wall to prevent access to it. It's a shame, because they could have done something really interesting with this. Perhaps a big Zonai deposit, or a Yiga base. I always like to read what those guys are up to. But consider this. A huge Frox could have made its den there with a bunch of smaller ones around too. Speaking of Froxes, that reminds me of the final mistake on this list. Number 7. Escaping the Demon King's army. This final one is more interesting because it deals with the limitations of the game, and a clear act by the developer preventing the player from leaving an area that they ought to be able to leave. We need a little setup to explain it. When we go to the end of the game, we dive down into an area called Gloom's Lair. This area is pretty massive, with oppressive music and interesting visuals showing off what I would best call a gloom tree. The walls of this massive cavern are mostly covered with gloom, with very rare outcroppings that you could actually rest on. The intent is that you would dive down, land on the main platform, and trigger a cutscene. The sages would show up to help Link, and then the fight with the Demon King's army would begin. Once the army is dealt with, the bosses would show up and Link would continue on through the sealed door to Ganondorf. Another detail they didn't draw attention to is that the actual entrance you fell down into was quietly covered up with a gloom root to prevent escape. Or at least it was supposed to prevent escape. More on that later. I'm more interested in this area of the map over here, because Gloom's Lair is so deep and so massive, it is actually lower than most areas in the depths. Off to the west, there is a part of the depths that can only be accessed by a chasm. Fun fact, I completely missed this chasm on my first playthrough, and thought that the only way to access it was by ascending from Gloom's Lair. So come the end of the game when I was exploring around, I made my way here on a flying device to investigate. And once I ascended through, I found a rather large Frox in the area, not happy to see me. And yes, like the Tingle Islands from earlier, this room should be pitch black. Count that as a bonus mistake, if you will. Now, to the thrust of this mistake. What happens if you try to ascend out of Gloom's Lair during the Demon King army battle? Well, here is some footage. As you can see, a message pops up saying you simply cannot leave the area, and then it warps you back to the battleground. I understand why they did this. It wouldn't fit the narrative for the sages to show up and then allow Link to abandon them. Perhaps if they did allow this, there could have been some internal conflict with the game involving the sages' avatars, whatever reason they had for doing it. The fact that the game prevents you from escaping isn't the mistake here. It's that you can ascend out of Gloom's Lair at all. Clearly, they should have blocked ascension through the whole ceiling. You may say that I am going beyond the intent of the creators by flying out to the rim of the room. And that's fair. But look at this. Remember the entrance that got covered with gloom roots? Well, if you fly up there, you can find an area right by it that you are able to ascend through, triggering the message. So yeah, allowing you to ascend through the ceiling at all is the mistake here. They really should have checked this more carefully, because nothing breaks the suspension of disbelief more than being clever enough to subvert the environmental limitations, only to be yanked back and told you can't do that. But hey, maybe you feel differently. Make sure to let me know in the comments. Before you head out guys, let me again thank you for making the last video a huge success. I didn't expect a video on a lake to catch so much attention, but it was my highest performing video for a few days before the algorithm petered out. With video performance like that, it feels like this YouTube thing is going to work out for me. And even the act of you watching my videos, not to mention liking and subscribing, is making that dream come true. So for all of you who are, thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you who have the means of helping me out more, you can always join my Patreon or become a channel member. And speaking of which, I have a new patron, Eric Atlas. Thank you buddy for helping me out. For those of you who do join, I'm going to start up some early access for my videos. Plus, you will gain access to my Discord, where we can talk about upcoming topics. I'm still figuring everything out, but I want to include those who support me the most in the development process going forward. And that means I'm going to start doing things like polls, discussions, and so forth. Plus, some exclusive videos about me and my life as a gamer. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. Thanks for making it to the end. Be safe, and may the way of the hero lead to the Triforce.